Foundation. Today, it says I'm live now, so I'll start over. Hello, and welcome to live programming at the More Freedom Foundation. Today, it's actually inadvertent live programming. I had, and I'm also going to have to, yep, all kinds of glitchy. So anyway, I actually had a very involved video for today. It's probably the most ambitious After Effects thing I'd ever done, with animations, this, that, and the other thing, stock market graphs, what have you. I was really psyched about it, really excited to get it out for you guys. And then I rendered it about 8 hours ago, and didn't work at all. It's a big mess, and I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to fix it. So in order to meet my Tuesday deadline, I uploaded every Tuesday without fail for 4 years. So today, I'm going to talk about a question that I get pretty often, and I think I may have laid it out briefly in some other live chats, but I think it's worth giving its own video. So why don't I cover North Korea? Why don't I talk about North Korea? If you open any news source, you get the sense that North Korea is this amazing, huge, big deal, and it's terrifying, and there's either gonna be nuclear war, or maybe everything's changing, maybe it's that. I mean, CNN, a network that has dedicated itself to basically covering Donald Trump every minute of every day, talks about the only time they break in is to have some expert come in and talk about North Korean nuclear missiles, or what the chances are for this, that, or the other thing, which is, of course, also to some degree about Donald Trump as well. But I have had a pretty long-standing policy of just, even before Donald Trump, of just not really talking about North Korea, because nothing's going to change, and no, it's not a crisis, and it's basically all just a manufactured joke. Yes, North Korea exists. Yes, it's absolutely a terrible place, and yes, they have progressively more and more powerful nuclear weapons, but they're not going to use them. They're just not, because that's like the whole point of nuclear weapons, is to make sure that your regime survives. So we do this dance. Usually with every new president, actually. I don't actually remember the Obama dance in detail, probably because it was stupid, but we certainly did it with Bush, with Clinton. We go around in these circles. It's interesting because North Korea, because it has a nuclear weapon, is sort of pretty much impregnable as far as U.S. options go. And there's also the fact that they have Seoul, South Korea, the capital of South Korea, sort of under constant threat from conventional weapons. It's just something that's never going to move. I'm not saying it's not interesting. I'm not saying it's not worth knowing about and looking into. It absolutely is. It's important. It's horrible what's happening to the North Koreans. It's something that we should look at more seriously and ask serious questions, like, why are our troops still there sort of 60 years later? It's interesting. It is kind of interesting watching this sort of current dance right now. When everybody was freaking out because Trump was childishly violent in his lingo, and now everybody in Washington, D.C. is freaking out because he's reaching out and trying to be friendly. It definitely throws an uncomfortable light on sort of the broader military-industrial complex, or Washington, D.C., or the elite, or the blob, or the whatever you want to call it. Just the way that they sort of see South Korea, South Koreans, North Korea, North Koreans, Korea as a whole, is just sort of a jobs campaign, and something that needs to be preserved in a certain way. And it's been highlighting the way that actually they serve to sort of perpetuate this issue, perpetuate this problem. So I just don't cover North Korea. When I do have one video that covers North Korea, mostly because I thought some of this is 3 or 4 years ago, because I thought that the sanctions that the Obama administration had put on North Korea in reaction to very poorly evidenced hacking, supposedly by North Korean folks, struck me as a really bad precedent, and with serious international applications. But in North Korea, nothing's going to change because of something that Trump does. It's just not going to happen. It's possible that he could, go all the way, go whole hog and invade. I mean, he has those powers, and he has the folks working for him who'd be willing to do it. But I find that really, really unlikely. And the idea that he's going to bring about a lasting peace on the North Korean peninsula is even more farcical than that. So with Trump and his approach to North Korea, it's just a more heightened, more ridiculous version of the dance that we've done with every president, with every new president, because this is, what North Korea has to do. It's unfortunate that it's sort of set itself up as the anti-imperialist country that has literally nothing else going for it, because the people who've been running it have done so much to crush it. So what they have to do every time they feel there's a new person to deal with in the United States, and each new president also feels the need to prove themselves by, doing something innovative or different with North Korea. So this is something that just happens with every new president. It's just heightened and stupider with Donald Trump, as pretty much everything about Donald Trump is sort of heightened and stupider. And I think that this issue in particular is another example of Trump just making already kind of crazy things about the way we organize things. The fact that, every 4 to 8 years, the US president, press, and government goes crazy about some lunatic crime family on the other side of the world. That's kind of crazy. That's kind of dumb. And Trump is just heightening that. He's making that more obvious. And no, there's nothing that's going to happen. That's the reason why I haven't bothered going in depth and figuring this out. I do think that I may, as I obviously I read this news, I skim it, I take a look at it, though it's not something I really feel like going in depth on, because once again, nothing's going to change. But I do read really interesting stuff about. I'm not sure. I can never keep it straight whether it's the president or the prime minister of South Korea. I believe there's a new guy. I believe his name is Moon. Don't quote me on that. And he's interested in moving things forward. He really seems to be willing to work with North Korea, and that's very, very exciting. And I was sort of questioning, maybe I should start covering North Korea, because something could actually happen. Not having very much to do with Donald Trump, but. We've seen this before. I forget the name. There was a special policy for it in the 90s. We've seen this before. There's new promises. A particular party comes to power in South Korea, and they're more friendly to North Korea, and they're more open to it, and nothing happens. I would love to be wrong. I would love it if there was a real break in North Korea and South Korea, and a real peace. Became possible, real motion, real forward motion. That actually, I think, is very possible. I have hopes that it will happen in my lifetime. And when that happens, it's going to be a surprise. It's going to be a pleasant surprise, or a very, very terrible surprise. But it's not going to have anything to do with what the US president does, what the Washington, D.C. thinks, what CNN, the New York Times, or Fox News is covering, because what it's covering now doesn't have much to do with North Korea either. It's basically just partisan hackery and whining about norm breaking. And that's true. Trump breaks norms. I think that's a very serious problem, and something that I think I've covered elsewhere. But I need to cover a lot more seriously coming up, because what he's doing with trade right now is pretty batshit crazy. But just the idea that North Korea is an important issue because LA is going to get nuked, or the flip side of that everything's going to be fine. North Korea is finally opening up. I didn't even like the idea that we're going to have peaceful progress in South Korea and North Korea is something that I find very unlikely. What the Trump administration is promising, the denuclearization of the country of North Korea, is beyond laughable. This guy got a nuke, and because of that, this regime got a nuke. Because of that, they get tons of money, tons of respect, and basically nobody can take you down guarantee. The idea that they're going to give that up. Kidding me? This tin pot dictator mobster just got to meet with the president of the United States. I don't necessarily think that was the wrong move. Diplomacy is a good thing, but the idea that Kim Jong-un would give up nukes when it gets him sitting down with the president of the United States, the guy who's still, for a little while longer, the most powerful man on the planet. The idea that he would give up nukes when nukes give him all this is beyond ridiculous. So anyway, that's what I think of North Korea. I'm sorry that I could not give you guys what I had promised, which is a sort of explanation / takedown of the Trump bump in the U.S. stock markets. That video is finished pretty much. I just need to figure out how to get it to render in After Effects. So that will hopefully be out tomorrow. But looking at the clock, I've only got 3 or 4 hours left, and it was looking like it was impossible to get it out today. So I wanted to meet my Tuesday deadline, get this video out. It has been a very long day. I want to go grab a sandwich. But let's see if anybody's got any questions in the live chat, because even though I'm seeing double, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Any questions? Anything on the topic? Fathel Guetta is always helpful and points out that the president of South Korea is Moon Jae-in, which I have almost certainly mispronounced horrifically, and I apologize. But that is the president. I believe it's president, right? President of South Korea. Let's see what else we got here. Because nobody cares about North Korea. Adam K points out that nobody cares about North Korea. I don't think that's true. I mean, I care about North Korea. I think what's happening there is terrible. It is interesting, and he also points out even the South Koreans don't care much. That's a really interesting tension here, is that at this point, South Korea, I think, probably has some formal thing saying we'd love the peninsula to be unified, we'd love to make everything work again, but the absolute lunacy that folks like John Bolton talk about, like, oh, we're going to reunify the peninsula. South Koreans do not want that. There's a big example in 1990 or something, 91. Germany and East Germany reunified between World War II and the end of the Cold War. East Germany was a communist state, and West Germany was a sort of U.S. affiliated Western European democratic state. And it was in dramatically better shape, but they really wanted to reunify, so they took on East Germany. And that East Germany was in terrible shape after 40 years of communism, but it was nowhere near in as bad shape as North Korea is today. And taking on East Germany for West Germany, becoming a unified Germany, it kind of has literally cost, I think, trillions of dollars, and kind of knocked Germany out of whack for like a decade. West Germany was a pretty impressive state. Germany today is a very impressive state, and kind of a world leader again. But digesting East Germany is very difficult for them. The South Koreans see that, and they see North Korea that has been, driven into the ground. There was some stat, I can't quote it, saying that North Koreans are actually some number of centimeters shorter than South Koreans on average, because it's been 50 years of malnutrition. It's a really difficult thing. So I think that's an interesting thing that Adam K pointed to. South Korea doesn't really want to reunify. They'd obviously love some kind of peace, but at this point, it'd be very difficult. Wow. Rashid Betha asks, how much did tungsten play a role in the Korean conflict? I have no idea. That's a connection I don't even get at all. All right. Well, Rashid Betha is listening to me via his iPhone while drinking wine, sitting outside the Mermaid Inn, which is pretty cool. Don't know what the Mermaid Inn is. All right. Daniel Casada S points out that that's a nice pillow I've got there, and thank you. I'm quite proud of it. It is an Airbnb that I'm staying in. I am in Bogota, Colombia. Not entirely sure why, but I know why. It's really cheap here, and I'm trying to finish a book instead of. I came here to finally finish my book, and I am spending the day with After Effects, which is not cool. and we'll have to do 2 or even 3 videos this week. So anyway, avoiding the British Empire, how the United States can avoid making the mistakes that the British Empire did. It's a book coming out sometime. Anyway, questions. Is it true the old would be no more? Oh, wow. Terry Johnson's asked, is it true that there'll be no more gingers in 30 years? Well, that's terrifying. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, well, I have met a lot of attractive gingers. They've never found me attractive, though, so I don't think we'll be breeding any gingers. We'll see, I'm not even sure if I'm technically a ginger. I've got a very red beard, but if I shave it, I can pass for sort of dirty blonde, but I don't know. I'm not really invested in my ginger status, nor am I, against it. Am I a self-hating ginger? Wow. Anyway, questions. There are no questions. Okay, what do you think about the Yemen war and its and any Iranian effects on that? I actually have Pejman Bakhtiari asks. I actually have a very large series on Yemen. I suggest checking it out. It's on my playlist. I think it's called Yemen's Disaster. I go into that in a great deal of detail. I think that actually, much like North Korea, I think that the narrative we're sold in, or not sold, I mean, the narrative that we're given, sold. Anyway, I go back and forth. In the U.S. press, sort of Western media more generally, is incredibly surface. And I think what my playlist does is dive in a little into the history and sort of looking at the underpinning things. I think that one of the main things to point to would be that that I don't think many people think about at all is sort of the deep roots of the Houthi movement. They're definitely, they only date back about, 17, 18 years. I believe it was 2001 or 2004 sticks in my head. But they are actually sort of the representatives of the traditional, they are not the representatives of, but they, I think, are working in the tradition of the traditional Zaidi Shia leaders of Yemen. I mean, for 1,000 years, these folks ran sometimes most of Yemen, sometimes most of Yemen out to Oman, and including the Hejaz, the sort of holy cities. But certainly of the part of North Yemen that is controlled right now by the Zaidi Shia Houthis has always been, with like very few exceptions, controlled by Zaidi Shia. I think that's an aspect of the Yemeni conflict that isn't really appreciated. You can talk about, proxy war and whatnot until you're blue in the face. But the fact is, the Iranians, I hear here and there might be like a Republican Guard consultant or something or two on the ground, but that's not been conclusively demonstrated to me anywhere. They're basically shipping some weapons and shipping some, possibly some blueprints for missiles, that kind of thing. But they're supporting an indigenous group against an outside invader. 2 of them, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Recently, I talked a little more in depth about the role of the UAE and how Saudi Arabia seems to be pretty fantastically losing this war. The UAE might actually not be doing so badly, but that's really what the Yemeni war is. It's an invasion of Yemen by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And to the extent that Iran is supporting the Houthis, which the United States makes a huge deal about at the UN and in the press, I think that's a good thing to do, actually. I like supporting indigenous movements against outside invaders, which is what the Iranians are doing. And they're not doing it to the extent that is pitched. I think the Iranians are kind of in a position where you see a lot, actually. They're in sort of this is a good analogy that didn't work out very well for the U.S. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in the 1990s, the United States supported a whole bunch of jihadists in creating Al-Qaeda in the process, but supported a whole bunch of folks with money and arms to kick the Soviets out. And the U.S. invested a small fraction of the amount of money that the Soviets poured into it, but the Soviets were actually there on the ground, and that's sort of the same issue here. The Saudis are pouring billions of dollars. They may not have, that many troops on the ground. I believe the UAE has more. But they're pouring tens of billions of dollars in an attempt to invade this country, and the Iranians can make it really, really hard for them with pocket change because they can just support indigenous elements. So yeah, that's what I think about the Iran and Yemen. Okay, Rashad Betha has a lot to say about tungsten that I will have to look into a bit more. Rare earth metals are a sort of fascinating topic that I don't know enough about. I consider myself, I wouldn't use the word expert, but I'm certainly fairly invested and feel that I'm fairly knowledgeable about oil, the way oil markets relate to politics at this point. But this whole rare earth thing is kind of a new bag that I don't have much to say about. Well, Daniel Casada S says Ginger's Going Ascent is a meme created by a shampoo company. It only has cred because National Geographic once made a one-page article about it. It's fascinating. Fatal Guetta, do you think the North Korean regime would collapse even if symbolic changes were made? I don't know enough about North Korea to say that with any seriousness. My sort of natural, could be biases or prejudices, tell me that a system like that is just incredibly unlikely to survive long term. I think it's sort of artificially propped up, well, by China for sure, but by just the weird dynamic that they've set up here. This sort of threat, bribe, threat, bribe, threat, bribe. So yeah, I have a faith in human freedom that leads me to believe that North Korea will eventually fall of its own volition, perhaps more quickly than we'd think. But I can't pretend to any kind of expert. But I kind of avoid the issue because I think that there's more of a potential for actual common sense and moving on in places like the Middle East. Tremendously depressing that I think. The Middle East is more, well, it should be tremendously depressing for the Koreas that I think the Middle East is an easier solved problem. But yeah, I just don't have the data on North Korea question, Fatal, sorry. Do we have any other questions? Got 20 watching there. An account. What do you think about democracy in Africa? That's a great question. I'm a huge fan. I've done some videos about this recently. I think it's something to be tremendously optimistic about. I think it's tremendously difficult for developing countries to develop democratic institutions, but they do. And that's amazing. That's one of the most impressive things about India, for example, that even though it's easier to have a democratic country when there's more money. Many countries manage to build these institutions anyway, and that's fantastic. And I think Africa, which has become dramatically more wealthy over the past decade and continues to accelerate, it is really inspiring to see the way that democracy is coming. Democracy is such a blanket term, and such a term in need of definition, but just a broadly representative democracy, that sort of thing. I've been staring at this computer too long to do a good definition on the fly. But that said, the progress of democratic institutions or non-extractive institutions, as the why institutions fail people would say, in Africa has been tremendously inspiring. And there is constant backsliding. Like, look at the United States. We elected Donald fucking Trump. And at a lower level of development, as much of Africa is, that backsliding can be much more frustrating and tremendously more damaging. So you can look at Africa is a tremendous. Should have been the first thing I said. Africa is a tremendous continent with 54 separate countries. It's very easy to pick nasty stories coming out of one place and just focus on that. And I feel like that whether or not people consciously do that in the US media, that's the picture that people get in the United States of Africa, because the only time we hear about a country is when something, blows up, something goes wrong. Like we hear a lot about, the president of Burundi having a terrible time, despite the fact that Burundi is really, really quite a small country. Whereas you only hear every 6 months or so, even though, there's actually a lot of PR and US government money behind it, you hear that Ethiopia is doing actually pretty well. I had some people make the case, people at a wedding a couple weeks back, make the case to me about Nigeria. They said there are actually a lot of really optimistic things to say about Nigeria, which is for a lot of people, some people I know who've worked there, is sort of like a watchword for like hopeless corruption. But, they had a peaceful transition of power recently. When Ebola came to Nigeria, which, in my stereotypical view of Nigeria, that should have been a horror show. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. No, the Nigerian authorities squashed it flat. So even in these countries that we hear a lot of horror stories about, like incredible progress is being made. So I'm tremendously optimistic about Africa. I absolutely should do more videos on that. I've just been diving in a little bit more on Somalia, which is obviously not a huge success story at this point. But I think it's hard to look at Africa because even though they are very individual countries, you kind of have to do a dive in on the region as well, because it's not just, oh, Rwanda's doing well, but, how's Rwanda influencing Congo? Or how is the conflict in Somalia being either helped, either improved or made worse by the actions of Ethiopia or Kenya. So it's very complex. But yes, I like democracy in Africa. Big fan, very optimistic, and have high hopes. Okay, questions. Wow. Rashad Betha says democracy only works in places where the average IQ of the nation is at least 95 to 100. Well, it's a good thing that IQ is almost completely determined by, institutional and not cultural, sort of institutional, cultural to a degree. Factors like, how much did you eat as a kid? How about, did your parents go to college? Did your grandparents go to college? These are all problems that are like very easily solved. And despite the fact that, maybe I don't get into average IQ. I don't get into the sort of intelligence quotient stuff much because the little I've looked into it leads me to believe it's bunk. I've aced every standardized test I've ever taken. I didn't freaking do that. That happened because I've been lucky enough to grow up in a family that, has that provided every book, didn't let me watch TV, that sort of thing. I don't know, that sort of idea that, an IQ test determines whether a place can get democracy or not is something I actually find a bit irritating, frankly. Saul Gutierrez says Ebola showed up when Westerners showed up. Go figure. That's actually, I'm going to massacre this, but there's actually some biological reasons behind that. That I think go beyond the conspiracy theory that perhaps Mr. Gutierrez was trying to push. Yes, Ebola did show up when Westerners showed up because what the sort of intensification of industry, agriculture, this, that, and sort of the other thing, and the medical revolution that the Western world brought to Africa meant skyrocketing populations. And with skyrocketing populations, more and more sort of disease sinks, were sort of cut into, just sort of wasteland becoming agricultural land, rainforests getting cut down, unfortunately. So when that happens, that actually makes it more likely that disease vectors will make it into the broader population. That sort of disturbs disease sinks or something like that. I can't, I will never pretend to be able to speak to sort of biology or ecology, but that's actually true. And it's not a nasty conspiracy. It's actually because Western technologies, medicine, whatnot, led to skyrocketing populations, which led to more land being sort of brought under cultivation, sort of disturbed, which led to more diseases. So yeah. FY Olo Swaggins asks, "Are you in Turkey right now, Rob?" And I am not. I'm in Bogota, Colombia, because I had a free place to stay in Mexico, and then I needed a cheap place to stay after that. And Bogota, Colombia is very cheap and very cold. Actually, I didn't bring any. I didn't bring any pants, which is unfortunate, but it's beautiful. And now that I've done this video, I'm looking forward to actually going out and checking out a little bit of it before coming back to figure out After Effects. Yeah. Crayon Desi asks, "You know new Russian weapons?" I didn't really. Yes, my understanding is that Putin rolled out a whole bunch of snazzy new weapons stuff. I think the whole weapons industry thing is, might be the root of all of our problems in the world today, actually. And the fact that Putin rolled out a new marketing presentation so he can convince people to buy his crap rather than U.S. crap is not really that interesting to me. I think it's a lot of people that were interpreting that as some kind of threat that Russia was making, and I think anybody who actually knows anything about geopolitics knows that there is no threat from Russia. Okay, maybe that was a little arrogant, but Russia is a country that I think has been abused very heavily, but yeah, they don't have the possibility. They're not a real threat to the world order, the United States, anything. And the fact that they've got put out a new marketing campaign for whatever weapons they sell doesn't interest me much. No, thank you, Crane DZ. I don't need new information about Russia's weapons. I'd like it if there were less of them, just as I would like it if the U.S. had less weapons. Ryan Ale asks, "What's your take on Trump's Space Force?" Oh, man. That's interesting, actually. I think I might, hopefully by the end of the year, I'd like to talk about that. I think a Space Force is kind of a great idea, actually, which is weird. I think that a lot of our problems, here, I'll just say right now, I think a lot of our problems can be that we have this massive U.S. military-industrial complex that desperately needs to find something to do. And for the past 20 years, the answer has been bomb and destroy Middle Eastern countries. You want an enemy? Well, how about vacuum? Vacuum's an enemy. Space is an enemy. And it's a lot more legitimately dangerous than Al-Qaeda is. So yeah, I think actually that's something I'd like to see, is more of a switch from this sort of people dying in the dust stuff to outer space, because you can spend endless amounts of money on that stuff in every congressional district in the country, rather than transfer trillions, literally trillions of dollars to a bunch of contractors who all live in the Bethesda suburbs. I think this sort of space thing would actually create a more useful sort of jobs welfare program than the current Pentagon, because that's all the current Pentagon is, to be clear. It's a jobs welfare program that to some degree helps congressmen, their districts, but mostly at this point helps a very shrinking number of contractors. So I think, yeah, actually a switch towards a Space Force might actually be a really good idea. However, obviously, I don't think Trump is the person to implement that. I think what he's suggesting is, instead of having, I think the Secretary of Defense Mattis's response, where he was like, he was basically, Mattis is now trying to keep the entire U.S. empire running, with a deranged child as a boss that he has to work around. And one of the points where he was like, all right, let's just move on. I can't remember if this was congressional testimony or just a comment to a journalist. He was like, yeah, we're not upgrading our force structure. Thank you very fucking much. Because what I think Trump is suggesting is that on top of the already ruinously expensive branches of the U.S. military that we have, he's suggesting just adding is it a fourth or a fifth one? We've got the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, and like a whole bunch of other little things, like joint operations people, different things. Anyway, but what he's suggesting is adding a fourth major branch to the military, which is just fucking insane. I think that's actually what the Air Force, I think what we should do is give up on the next generation fighter bomber bullshit and just have the Air Force devoted towards space exploration and yeah, warfare. That's inevitable. But yeah. Anyway, Fatal Guetta points out the last time Russia was a threat was in the 1970s. I think that's largely accurate, though, of course, this depends on where you are. Russia has been a threat to the Ukraine. Really, nobody else. Yeah. But yes, Russia's time as a great power did end in the 1970s, or rather 80s. Oh God, Saul Gutierrez is talking about the Talmudic Zionists. I need to put a link. Where's my link thing? It's great. I wonder if my effort on this topic has helped people talk about it less. But I wrote a Medium post a while back, sort of talking about, and I deleted my link to it. Anyway, maybe I'll put it in the description, but probably not. But yeah, this whole idea that the Zionists control everything is something I find very irritating. The U.S. president does not work for the Netanyahu. Netanyahu works for me as a U.S. investor. He's just keeping the military-industrial complex going and creating risks for Israel, the Palestinians, obviously. And there you are. Vid says, hi from Iran. Hi from Colombia. Imagine Trump declaring war on dark matter. That's interesting. What do you think about nations and corporations investing in space mining while it's forbidden by the international law to claim any part of space? Or at least I heard. This is interesting. So what I think Fiolos Wagenins is pointing to is the fact that under a UN convention, the space is meant to be like, I think kind of like, is it Antarctica or the Arctic, whatever, like the common something or other of all mankind. There's not supposed to be any private exploitation, and no individual government is supposed to sort of control it. I'm actually a big fan of the United Nations. I'm look forward to that evolving further, evolving to something that's a little more respectable. I do think that UN Space Convention needs some serious revamping. I had thought there was a movement to do that. I may have just missed it completely. It may have been revamped. I don't like the idea of the United States or China setting up their own fiefdoms in space. It'd be great if that UN convention could avoid that happening, but I kind of think that U.S. and Chinese fiefdoms in space are kind of inevitable. We should fight against that. But the idea of slowing down private exploitation of space strikes me as kind of nuts. I think none of those asteroid mining companies have sent out a single thing yet. At least I don't think so. I used to follow that more closely. And I think part of their business plan is getting that UN convention revised or doing the lobbying necessary to get the United States to just break it, which I would not like. I would like that UN convention revised because I don't think we're going to get up there without a viable sort of private means, without a profit motive. And I think that's where we're meant to be. Kind of a nerd and a romantic on that one. Okay. What about Merkel? Well, MVD is 007. I don't know. I'm embarrassed to admit I have not been following the German politics as closely as I should. I know that Merkel did win an election, but not very convincingly, and there was all kinds of problems around the coalition. Europe's a bit of a mess right now with Italy. Of course, it's been a bit of a mess for about a decade now. I've got a recent video sort of talking about that, how the European Union is running out of time. I'd recommend that, but I don't have anything new to say about Angela Merkel, I'm afraid. Okay. Daniel Casada S asked, this is a very good point that also I have very little to say about. Close to 200 dead in Nicaragua, major protests in every city, protesters demanding new elections and Ortega to step down. Are you following the situation? No, I am not. I would actually feel bad about it because that's something that I would like to be more on top of. Unfortunately, this week is trying to write a book on the British Empire, and today has been trying to figure out how to make After Effects work. So But yes, I should absolutely be reading more about Daniel Ortega and Nicaragua. It's a fascinating situation where Daniel Ortega, who was actually sort of a Assad of the 1980s, a guy that the Reagan administration did everything to try and get rid of, including funding a large civil war, actually left power in 1990 and then was reelected, I think, within a decade after that, and is now finally on the brink of being pushed out. My understanding is that Ortega, though he governed certainly much more rationally and humanely after being elected, was still a pretty bad guy and has been in power for a bit too long, way too long, significant portions of 40 years, way too long. But his elected term has gone way too long, and he's been consolidating power in some really uncomfortable ways. So it's nice to see the possibility of his failing. Obviously, we'd like it if there were no as few casualties as possible, and that something sensible emerges after the fact. But I just don't know enough about what's happening. Oh, okay. And what do you think about Merkel? I love Angela Merkel. I think she's great. I think she's done a lot of good things. I think that her refugee crisis thing, which is, I think, viewed by many as, like this big failing on her part, was maybe one of the best things she's ever done. Crime in Germany is at a historic low. Most of Europe is dealing with the issue of where's the workforce? Nobody's reproducing. She added 1 million people. It's going to be a rough go. It's going to be unpleasant. But 20 years from now, she'll be lionized. And she's a woman. Hopefully she'll still be around to appreciate that. But that said, I think we can all agree she's been in power way too long. She's putting up like Putin level numbers. She's been in power for like 15 years. That's ridiculous. I think with this last election, a German buddy of mine recently said that she had to stay there to continue to handle the fallout of the refugee issue. Yeah, obviously I'm a big fan of Angela Merkel. I really like women leaders, honestly. And her just sort of very calm approach to governing throughout has been very impressive, and Germany has obviously been doing extraordinarily well. Bring on the matriarchy, but obviously it's time for Merkel to go. She's been there too long. There were extenuating circumstances, but yeah, I don't know what the actual political details of Germany are, but whenever before the end of the term, she should probably shuffle off the stage, and I think she'll be very, very well remembered. Just go, I don't know, be the head of the UN or something like that. Oh, nice. Ross says there's okay, that's not nice. Shit, I've got air raid sirens going off here in Tel Aviv somehow. What the hell is going on? That's interesting. Well, let's all go to BBC News, see what's going on. I hope nothing bad is going on. Though I'd imagine Tel Aviv is a place where you hear air raid sirens now and again. It's interesting how my reaction when I hear about potential death and destruction is interesting. That's very sad, but I guess I am a human being, and important to remember that no matter how often I lambast media for profiting off of death and destruction, I kind of do that too. I try to make more positive videos about more positive things, and very few people watch them. Anyway. Fidel Guetta makes an interesting point. A lot of people are forgetting that the Syrian refugees are quite well educated. That's very true. There's a broad mix, though. There are a lot of people who are quite well educated. Syrian refugees I knew in Istanbul, some of them, this one woman spoke literally 6 languages, like fluently. It was amazing. Of course, she's now, got a pretty awesome job in Europe. And I know other folks. The problem is there are actually a lot of poor Syrian refugees because U.S. vetting is so idiotic and lengthy. It requires you to sit in a refugee camp for 2 years. We pretty much only get the most huddled poor masses yearning to breathe free, and then throw them into I think we give. I mean, it's fascinating. So Germans require that all their refugees learn German, and supports them, gives them full medical care until they are employable. I think something like 25% of them are employed at this point, and that's actually a tremendous success because the German employment system is so difficult to get into, and yeah, they also learned German, and 25% of them learned German in 2 years. It's freaking amazing. But anyway, in the United States, there's maybe some church groups that'll adopt you, and the government gives you like a check for about 3 months, and then you're on your own. So we're basically taking the poorest and least capable of the Syrian refugees, those who can sit in a refugee camp for 2 years, to go through all the absurd hoops, the offensively developed vetting that you have to go through to get to the United States. People who literally have, just not very much going on. So we're taking those people, the least capable of the Syrian refugees, dropping them in the United States and saying, yep, have fun after 3 months. We should do more to support refugees, and we should take in more refugees. But anyway. Saul Gutierrez likes women in the kitchen. Okay. Thoughts on the current Iraqi government? Oh, man. I have been meaning to get back to the Iraqi government for a while. I don't think I've done a video on Iraq exclusively in like 3 or 4 years, and I haven't done one even partially in probably 2 years. And I think the videos, what I've said about Iraq, I think is pretty it was pretty really negative, and I regret that a little bit. So I think I need to revisit Iraq, because they are currently in much better shape than I expected. I thought that after the whole ISIS thing, like, this was it was broken, because it wasn't just the ISIS thing. It was ISIS rose in Iraq as a reaction to the Maliki government's sort of Shia supremacist approach. Like, I was like, okay, it's finally done. It's finally broken. We just need 3 separate countries. Let's freaking get it over with. Like, let's do it. That was my attitude. But it's still ticking over. It actually, the ISIS's destruction of the Maliki government and that sort of group of power centers might actually have been helpful for Iraq. And they've now got kind of a legitimate victory that they can hold on to. Just that, all of the country banded together to fight off this horrible threat from ISIS. So, I mean, who knows? It could be something to be more positive about. Abadi was really well regarded. The new elections with Sadr, I mean, obviously from the U.S., I'm not a big fan of militia leader who used to kill U.S. soldiers being a big guy in the Iraqi government, but that could be great for Iraqis. He could be like a George Washington figure. Seriously. The British got to like George Washington. I guess I can get to like Muqtada al-Sadr, if he does right by Iraq. So yeah, those are my very poorly formed musings on the Iraqi government. Cletus223 asks, what do you think about Brexit now? What little I've kept up with on it has been complaints that the British politicians have been dragging their feet. I think Brexit was a terrible idea. I made numerous videos in the run-up saying it's a freaking terrible idea. I continue to believe it's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. I think the European Union is in desperate need of some rehabbing, some reconfigurations, some probably absolutely more sovereignty for the constituent nations. I think this approach from Brussels with the administrative socialistic complex was poor. I think the currency was a terrible idea, and it was great that Britain stayed out of it. But I think that Britain leaving the European Union actually makes all of those changes a lot less likely. And it also threatens the European Union, which I feel is probably the greatest force for peace in Europe over the past 70 years. Yes, the European Union was only formed after the Maastricht Treaty in the early 1990s, but there was also the European Economic Community before that, which did a tremendous job. They're I would argue they're the reason why Greece, Spain, and Portugal have democracies. democracies. And the European Union is, I think, the reason why the rest of Eastern Europe doesn't look like Ukraine. So, yeah, I think Brexit's terrible. I think as far as the minutia of the problem with Brexit and the reason that Theresa May, I never pronounce it appropriately, the reason that the UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, is still there despite a tremendous own goal of that sort of snap election that she expected to give her a bigger majority, almost completely taking away her majority. The fact that nobody thinks she's doing a good. Yeah, I appear to be back. That was weird. But honestly, all right, am I back? Huh. Ah, there we go. I am back. But honestly, I've been doing this for a little while now, and I'm super tired. And yeah, I think I'm going to take off pretty soon. I need to eat some. Haven't really done that today. Uh, yeah. Yeah, to finish the thought, I think UK Prime Minister Theresa May is still Prime Minister despite the fact she sucks at it because nobody else wants to do it. Nobody else wants to do this Brexit thing. Like the EU wasn't designed, those treaties, those alliances weren't designed so as to get out of them. So that's really problematic. And I think it's a bad thing, and I would be very happy if Brexit did not happen. So that's me on Brexit. Parth Bharat asks, hey, can you please share your views on Pakistan? Which is a question I've been asked many, many times. Yeah, I can't say enough. I don't know enough about Pakistan, basically. That's sort of the problem. Yeah. So I think it's very hopeful that China seems to be pouring money into the place. I have high hopes for that, but I do think that the sort of damage that has been done in Pakistan by its sort of metastasizing military. I was thinking actually yesterday about how similar Pakistan and Egypt are with the problems they face. I mean, that they are countries where the military is just way too powerful, and not just in terms of, having power over the governments. They have economic power, they have their own businesses, this, that, and the other thing. I'm not sure that's a big dynamic in Pakistan, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Yeah. I think Pakistan has a lot of issues, and I hope they'll be able to surmount them. But I will not be able to talk about that in any more detail before I read a whole bunch of books on Pakistan, which is not happening yet. What about U.S. leaving Human Rights Council? Oh, God. Whatever. It's a shame because I really used to like Nikki Haley. She's turned into a Trump bot. I think the general U.S. attitude towards the United Nations is idiotic. It's an institution we created that does a tremendous amount of work for us, like, I don't know, policing 15 trouble spots so the U.S. military doesn't have to. And this sort of whining because occasionally the General Assembly says something that most of the world believes about Israel, it does not really bother me. I think we should be more supportive of the UN, not looking for ways to whine about it. Yeah, Parth Varad says about Pakistan, every country has a military. In Pakistan, the military has a country. I think it's kind of a similar dynamic in Egypt. Okay, I am literally falling asleep here. I am so sorry that I could not get you the video that was promised today. It should be coming, if not tomorrow, at some point later in the week. Please tune in to find out the truth about the Trump bump in the U.S. stock market and how it's probably over. My name is Robert Morris. I tweet at RoboLaw. That's at RoboLaw. My Instagram is at The Golden Age. Please consider donating through PayPal or signing up on Patreon. I am literally losing it, you guys. I'm sorry that. I hope this was useful, and I will hopefully be returning with a produced video later this week. Thank you so much, and I'm amazed and flattered that folks jumped in to chat, and there had 20 people watching this whole time, even though I literally decided to do this 45 minutes beforehand. I'm very grateful to you guys. This obviously would not be possible without you. Many thanks.